What is up, my dudes? It's been like a month, so it's time for another video, and let's do one on the ST2. It's like kind of a review slash replay cast. Since the hype has kind of died down on the double barrel Russian tanks, it's a perfect time to jump in and have a honest look on what this tank is and what it adds to the game and how good it really is. So when this came out, a lot of people were worried that the heavy tank with such a high alpha damage was gonna be rather, you know, unwelcomed into the game and will set a new level of power creep, and just generally high alpha isn't really a super fun thing to play against. But as it turns out, the Russian double barrel heavy hype kind of died out pretty quickly, as the tier 10 lacks one vital thing to be even really considered competitive in tier 10, and that is mobility. Basically every heavy tank that is even remotely considered good is also much faster than this. This is not an IS-7 with 2 guns, this is more like an IS-4 with 2 guns, and it also is lacking that frontal hull armor. However, the turret is pretty good on this. The cupola weakest parts will be like 250 plus armor, which is you know, sufficient enough to bounce most AP while you're looking at it. To be fair though, there are some weak points in the turret, in between the guns, right in the middle. There is an armor strip that's 140, but to be fair, most of the time you'll find yourself just getting penned by gold ammo in the cupola, as that 250 pen becomes quite useless the second you're fighting a lot of gold ammo. Before we get into the meat and potatoes with the ST2, let's talk about the tanks before in the tech tree. So the IS-22, the tier 8 tech tree tank, was by far the most different out of all the Russian double barrel heavy tanks, as it has least amount of alpha, and the guns actually handle pretty good for what they are, letting you snapshot, and also the charge time on that tank was only 2 seconds, and if you don't know how that works, basically you can charge up both shots at the same time, and it takes a set amount of time for each of the double barrel tanks, and on this tank it is 2.3 seconds if I'm not mistaken, and if I could start every game like this, I'd be a fucking happy man. But yeah, back to the tier 8, it is, like I said, one of the big outliers in the double barrel tank family, and you would have think it would have made for a much better fit as a premium tank compared to the 703 2, but Wargaming has been doing this lately with the premium tanks being just the ones that kind of belonged more in the tech tree. Same with the Pantera, much more like a premium tank than the Progetto is, since basically all the other tanks are much more similar to the Progetto than the Pantera, and the same goes for the 703 and the IS-22. Jumping up one tier, you get the stretch limousine, the IS-32, a longer version with better front armor, and obviously the 2 guns. The guns are 390 alpha, but before we jump into that, here's the brain-dead EBR push. As it turns out, in the later parts of this game, it's a really dumb play for one reason, and that reason is that there's not actually that many people playing behind him. Ruined my DPM really badly with that shot, but killing that shit at any cost is really highly recommended. So here I greed through since I already took the shot, but unfortunately for me, the 121 crest the top of the ridge with that gun depression gets me as well, so not really the best trade for me, but at this point I'm just really happy with EBR being dead, and obviously the RD being dead as well. Should be pretty hard to lose this game from this point on. Back to the Russian stretch limo. A lot of people consider it to be the strongest tank in the line, and for me, it is kind of split between the tier 8 and the tier 9. Tier 10, I think, is probably the weakest tank in this line, as it just lacks the mobility that the previous 2 tanks had. But the stretch limo is basically an IS-3 with a bit of an improved frontal plate, where it is better than the IS-3 for sure, but it's also tier 9. And for tier 9, spanning an IS-3 2 is about the same as for tier 8 spanning IS-3s. There's only really armor if you're hull down, or if you're fighting lower tiers with your lower plate being hidden, or they're just not shooting at your lower plate, because in the end of the day, the IS-3 2 has like 140 millimeter thick cupola. It's pretty small and hard to hit, but it's there, and that's always a threat for you. And also the lower plate is not that strong, but being around 200 millimeters of armor, and most tier 8s already have that amount of pen, so you're gonna have to try to do some tricky angling with that thing a lot of the time to bounce even tier 8s, and not talking about 9s and 10s. Combined with the fact that the gun is pretty bad on the IS-3 compared to the tier 10, and especially compared to the tier 8, it struggles a bit with closing the range that it needs to do to make the gun effective without losing a lot of hit points due to the lack of frontal armor. But statistically, I found that I do pretty damn well in that tank, so it is hard to complain about it. But I found it more frustrating to play than the 8 and even than the tier 10, while the tier 10 I think is worse, and tier 10 games are just definitely worse, and the tanks that are really good at tier 10 are definitely much better than the tanks that are really good at tier 9. And one thing you might have noticed so far in this game is I only pulled off one double shot, and that was a blind shot on artillery. That is something that I noticed in this tank. Surely the double shots are flashy and nice, and the double 440 alpha is a nice improvement over the 390 at tier 9, but at the same time it is a bit of a gimmick with 2.3 second charge up time. You can surely make shots at close range, especially if you or start the process before peaking. It can be incredibly deadly, especially against the lightly armored tanks, but at the same time, shooting shit at range with the double shot charging, if they're moving, is quite difficult to pull off properly. You also kind of lose control over your aim at a certain point, like half a second before the shot is pulled, I noticed. So that makes shooting moving targets with the double shot quite tricky. You know, obviously shooting shit like EBRs is close to impossible when they're moving around with the double shot. Your lead has to be insanely good for that. After the RD has been murdered, this position has become insanely strong. The peak under the rail card is so good for me. I still need to be careful not to overexpose to shoot this 121, but this position is insanely strong for me. I can just sit here and shoot the hill if they ever commit. I'd rather shoot the 268 as it lacks the IS-7 superior side armor, but I don't really quite get the shot. And you can see I'm not really worried about my DPM being too bad after shooting twice there. Generally, you just take every shot you can, and the double shot is, like I said, more of a gimmick that you employ when the opportunity presents itself, but mostly you just keep it single shot and take all the damage that you can, similar to auto reloaders. Unless you're in a direct fight where you know how much shots you need and how much DPM you need to kill the guy you're fighting, you just generally go for unloading as much damage as you can. And in this tank, obviously, the damage potential impact is there every time you shoot the second shot, because you gotta wait 5 seconds to pull it after you shoot for the first time. But at the same time, if you have a target that is even reasonably likely to be penned by your shot, it's usually worth taking those shots. Alright, so let's talk about the SD2 a bit more in detail now. So obviously you get the two 440 alpha guns, both with 258 penetration. Your reload without any equipment is around 11.2 seconds. Obviously you can get that down quite a bit to just above 10 seconds per gun. Obviously you get the penalty for shooting both guns at the same time. I don't remember, was it 2 or 3 seconds? Either way, you usually go for it, because again, your reload between shots is 5 seconds, which is a really long time when you think about it. And if you cannot kill, or if you can't kill your enemy with the double shot, you usually should go and try to pull it off, because even situations like this, you want to pull off the double shot, because the penalty for shooting both guns isn't as bad as having to wait for the single gun to reload. And in cases like this, you usually want to take as much damage as quickly as possible, even though you might argue that here, I guess if I only kept it to the second shot, I could have done more damage by this point, but you generally just take damage when you have it in front of you. And here I'm just trying to guess which way he went. He probably didn't go anywhere with that giant barn, and I should have just gone for the middle shot there, but I went for those two, and I definitely don't want to eat those shots in return, so I'm gonna actually disengage from that fight for now. Funnily enough, for the fact that this is definitely on the super heavy side of Russian heavy tanks, it is lightly enough armored from the front that you can get penned by an FE405 Hesh round, so we definitely don't want to take any silly chances with those guys, even though it's quite unlikely at that range that they would hit parts that they can pen. Mostly it's just a flat lower plate that can be penned by that. The driver's hatch is 220 millimeters for a pretty flat angle, but then again it's also angled, so getting flat shot on that driver's hatch is actually not that difficult from almost no matter what angle you're looking at it, but obviously it becomes a pretty small target, especially at that kind of range. So this is not really the position you want to be with possibly two FEs on the hill, but I gotta help out these guys with these TDs, and that's what I'm trying to do here now. And looking at my service record over the past 100 games or so that I played in this vehicle since its release, the armor use efficiency on this tank is not that great as you would expect from a heavy tank that's this slow, and obviously that is kind of the issue with this entire platform. It is just too slow for how much armor it provides. My average bounce on this is around 1230. I think the only Russian heavy that does poorer than that for me is the 277, and that heavy tank is way more like a medium tank, and in fact actually the 430U also bouncing quite significantly more on average than the ST2. So once again, the combination of poor mobility and bad armor generally doesn't go well together in a world of tanks, as you know, tanks like E100 might let you know about that already. Anyways, this is a really bizarre push by the AMX-30. Looks like a complete suicide. I don't want to really be even involved in that, but it seems that he has managed to drive behind the Jagdpanzer, but there is that gorilla somewhere in the background there, but he might have fucked off and is not supporting anymore. But then you look at the matchmaking, there's so many TDs. We know where the 1FV and the 268 is, but the gorilla was on this side, and so was the other FV also isn't spotted, so are they really all on the hill is really the question now. And at this point, I mean, the 30B lived, so I guess so. At this point, this game should be pretty hard to lose. The enemy team really has to make this push from the hill happen in order to even the odds a bit. Those heavy tanks there need to die for them to not be pretty horribly flanked very soon. And once those FVs will lose their scouting heavy tanks, they'll definitely be in a lot of trouble. And we actually managed to spot the other FV, and we start charging our double shot immediately when we spot him, as we want to get that damage in there as quickly as possible. And the 705 has come down the hill into the middle. I did just fire both of my shots, but we will be able to reload one before he can get his gun down to shoot at me. And now obviously we're just keeping it to one shot, shooting as soon as we're reloaded, and managed to angle out enough for him to mess up his shot. He was shooting on the move though, so it's not that surprising there. Now just trying to not take that extra hit. As you can see, the mobility of this vehicle in the turn radius and the turn rate is rather poor, to say the least. So almost got shot there again by the 705, but at this point the FVs are basically waiting to get picked off. There isn't really much you can do in an FV in a situation like that with that camo. We can go for some blind shots. Definitely one of them is most likely still on the hill, and if I was in that FV, I'd probably position myself on the back of the hill in those bushes over there. So we're gonna go for a blind shot immediately. Clearly don't hit that one, as it hits a house behind him. Also, he's a one shot. We were just a tiny bit off, and the second shot's a bit too greedy to hit. And the last FE left. I mean, we can hope that he stayed on this side, but if he didn't, then we probably have no chance to shoot at him anyway. So just gonna load both guns and be ready to double shoot, because I believe he still had enough health for the double shot to be worth it. And I don't think our team is gonna give us the 5 seconds in between shot reload to get both shots in, but actually turns out that he was just completely out of reach for us, unfortunately, so we will have no say in the cleanup here. Alright, so here's the end plate. We end up getting our ace tanker. We saw around 6.2k damage in the game, but obviously we knew that we did more, and we actually ended up with the 7.6k damage done. So not only the already blind shots obviously hit, but we got a couple of more in there. Even looking back at this replay, it's not that easy to pinpoint where exactly I hit the blind shots, as I do tend to blind shoot quite a lot on that map. There's quite a lot of bushes that are worth checking. The blind shooting also cost me the kill on the FV there in the end, but overall it definitely paid off in this game. Also picked up 1900 assistance and blocked just over 1500 damage with armor. Picked up 4 kills and 1299 base experience, which was good enough for an ace tanker. But yeah, to sum it up, the SD2, definitely not the power creep that some people were referring it to be. A pretty reasonable addition to the game, while not really standing out in any particular way apart from the double shot, which very often becomes a gimmick, especially if you care to do well in the entire game and not just go for some highlight reel clips with the double shots. You're very often better off just leaving that feature alone and just using this like an IS4 with an extra shot in the in storage. So in the end of the day, the ST22 slots in somewhere in the middle of the heavy tank tier 10 pack. While probably better than stuff like IS4s and whatnot, it's just not really there when it comes to the meta tanks. It doesn't really hold its own against the Chieftain. I mean, nothing in tier 10 does, and that's really the biggest issue with this tank. It is reasonably fair and reasonably balanced, and that means that it is quite a bit below the current meta of tanks that are just quite a bit above this average level. So while the gimmick is nice and it's different and it's unique, and can't really say much bad about this entire line apart from maybe the fact that they slotted in the premium where it probably should have been the tech tree tank, and the tech tree tank should have been the premium. But other than that, there's really not much to say about this, but that tier 10 is still completely screwed matchmaking wise. Your regular games so often include 2 or 3 arties and 2 or 3 or even 4 sometimes light tanks, and most of them usually are EBRs, making the gameplay incredibly painful in tier 10. So is this thing worth the grind? Probably not. For the gimmick, sure, but don't expect a super competitive tier 10 heavy tank out of this one. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the SD2. But what do you guys think? Do you think this tank belongs in the game? Do you think it adds anything? Or do you think the tier 10 is so screwed that it doesn't really matter that a tank like this gets added to it or not? Let me know in the comment section below, and I'll see you on the next one.